Superb, man.
Cool. Yeah.
Well, welcome to Andertons.
Thank you.
And thank you guys. Yeah, thank you guys for tuning in. If you don't already know, this is Adam Getgood, or as many of us will know him as Nolly. Now, we have a plethora of things around us, all of which you have had a hand in.
Yeah.
Which I think will be the crux of our conversation, as you are one of what I consider this sort of new breed of entrepreneurial working musicians who have realized that maybe the career through just performance alone isn't enough, in a way that perhaps guys and girls from 20-25 years ago, the music scene would have supported that type of performance career.
Yeah.
So you tell me, I mean, give us the potted history of your sort of, musical journey through to maybe when you first started thinking about getting into designing product.
It's really interesting, that's how it looks from the outside, because from the inside, it really just looks like me following curiosities. I've learned a lot about business along the way, but I've never had a head for business. I've never had a strategy, really, to any of these things. It's just, I just love sound. I love figuring out why things make certain sounds. And in the process of doing so, you quite often kind of either go like, well, I think I'd like to manipulate this so that I get this sound that I really like, or just kind of realizing where the great sounds that have always attracted you actually come from, because it's so easy to think that the source of a great sound is one thing, whereas it might be something completely different. I mean, just a random example might be, for example, designing a guitar, realizing how important the bridge pickup placement relative to the bridge is for determining like a whole voice of an instrument. And if you didn't do that test or hear about it, you might be grabbing guitars off the wall and being like, well, this one just sounds really bright. It's a bright guitar. You might not realize that actually the only thing that it's making it that way is just the placement of the bridge pickup, just to give like a really random potted example. But, so that to me is just fascinating. I love kind of figuring out and going through that R&D process of trying to understand exactly where the changes in sound are coming from. And that's just naturally led me to then working and creating products, which, I'm very grateful for. Very lucky at this point to be kind of surrounded by some really great people and companies, and to be able to have an outlet for these experiments, so it doesn't just feel like I'm just kind of, tinkering pointlessly.
How much of the journey do you think was pivotal on you meeting Misha and being involved with Periphery, or do you think, was there an element happening before that of you getting into this sort of thing?
No, that moment was a huge turning point for me, without doubt. And for reasons directly to do with Misha and Periphery, and just the timing of that happening while this kind of new wave of progressive metal genre was, really just still like in utero, basically, about to come out and become quite popular in a niche way, as it were. Yeah. That was really like, that was a moment that set my life on a completely different course. So pre the Periphery stint, if I'd have said to you, describe yourself as a musician, would you have said I'm a guitar player? 100%.
Or so, not a multi-instrumentalist, or just I'm a guitar player?
No, I mean, I played other instruments when I was growing up, but once I found guitar, that became my only instrument. And I was doing a degree in guitar. I was doing lots of transcribing. I was recording demos for my band, and I was really enjoying that process, but I was really struggling at the same time to get good sounds. And yeah, I thought, even once I met Misha, that it was like, oh cool, I've got this other contact who's in another band. Hopefully my band in the UK is gonna get some traction, we can do some tours. But there was no grand plan. As I say, I didn't have any strategy, and I think you'd have had to be a very, very bullish investor to be like, I'm going to put all my time and energy into this really niche metal subgenre. It was very much luck that...
What was your... you know what? I mean, this is... I should do more research prior to these interviews, but so what was your band pre-Periphery?
I was in a band called Red Seas Fire. So that I was kind of in that band from the very early days. And then I started to get to be really friendly with the Periphery guys. I actually filled in on bass quite presciently. That was in the first summer holiday of my first year of my guitar degree, but I had no idea that bass was going to become this thing in my life. And funnily enough, that's when I first tried a Dingwall bass, because the then bassist who I was filling in for played a Dingwall, and I was playing that. And then, later when the opportunity came up to join on bass, it was very much like, do I want to not have a shot at being a guitarist? You know, there's plenty of ego about it. I was spending a lot of time and energy trying to shred, and wanted my position in a band to be as lead guitarist, and was suddenly like, well, do I go down that very uncertain route, or there's this band that are about to go on tour with Dream Theater and have all these options coming up, but it's on bass, and it turned out to be another just like completely life-changing moment. And I think in hindsight, I mean, obviously I made the choice that I did, but I think in hindsight it was a pretty smart one. And especially joining Periphery that had 3 guitarist positions and one with as much visibility as Misha had, to be the only one playing this instrument, and completely unwittingly to be in a position to platform a new model of bass guitar to metal bassists who didn't really have like a totem instrument to kind of gather around. That was just like such a case of amazing luck, really. That
must have thrust you. Periphery were one of those bands that come along every so often, and then everyone just go, their gear choice becomes so it's chicken and egg, isn't it? It becomes so scrutinized, but because their gear choice is so clever and so well thought out to make the music, so everyone latches on, and it's like, what are the guitars, what are the pedals, what's the backline, what's the bass, what's the drummer doing, all, you know, it's just like I just remember for a time 10 years ago maybe that was it. They were just the band to go, right, what are they using, because that's what I need if I'm going to make this kind of music.
Yeah, I mean, it was always that way. You know, before Periphery was big, a lot of the joy in participating in this genre of music as a guitarist was about gear. You know, Misha, I would always see posting on forums with obscure guitars, amps like the Engels, which are pretty relatively unknown, especially in the States. He was championing at the time. There was a lot of early adoption of devices like the Axe Effects, for example, or general integration of digital effects. And it was really breaking new frontiers in terms of a new kind of guitar sound. So, and then, you know, later, not a new kind of bass sound, but popularizing this kind of bass sound in that style. So, yeah, it was interesting. I do see Periphery as an interesting phenomenon, especially like, I'm not in the band anymore, still very friendly with them, of course, but like looking at it from the outside, it does feel like there is something special that happened around that band. You know, it might not be the biggest band in the world, but like just in every direction, all of the instrumentalists all the band members kind of having quite a unique visibility. It was quite a special thing, I think.
It was a real meeting of gear junkie minds as well, because, you know, Misha, perhaps not quite to the degree that you've gone on, but certainly he was very into product design as well.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe we'll come back a little. I sort of want to keep going with the journey for a bit. So,
but it's an interesting thing to put a pin in, because I think if you do come up trying lots and lots of different gear, you do start to form impressions of like, you know, this is what's available on the market, this is what can and can't be done, and you start to get those ideas of like, well, I wish if I built my version of this, it would be able to do this thing that device can do. Yeah. Whereas I think maybe if you come up with more traditional tones, then you don't have as much playing through one rig for many years, you might not have that same kind of insight.
I remember talking to Misha about some of the products he was designing, and it was clear that whilst there was a passion for, you know, just exploring what would be possible, you know, with a soldering iron and certain components, and what if I do this and this, there was also a realization that Periphery was probably never going to be commercially big enough for him to feel like I can just retire and live off the streaming income or whatever.
Yeah, it's already improbably big as a band for the kind of music they make.
Yeah. So I think it was already a realization, and that's what I mean. I think when I did the right at the beginning of this, of sort of going that entrepreneurial sense of, okay, I probably do need to consider how else I can make a living out of this than just writing records and touring.
I mean, I think Misha wouldn't mind me saying, like, he is very business minded, always has been. That's very much kind of part of his character, and I haven't been. And I think it's very lucky for me to have been in the presence of not just him, but also especially Matt from Periphery, that are far more business minded. I mean, Matt literally studied business, that I kind of learned some things through osmosis, and also could kind of just, I don't know, it's just like when you see what other people around you are doing, it kind of opens those doors to you doing it as well. But I was very much kind of not riding their coattails, but I was very much kind of following the paths that they were blazing, and also with less of a business mind, just like, well, I just want something that sounds like this or that feels like this. And
that's interesting. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I certainly think my own, whatever living I've made out of music, I think the passion for doing it comes first, and then if a business, if there's an opportunity to earn something out of it as well, that's obviously added bonus. I kind of feel like, I think it's important for anybody thinking, okay, well, how do I go into this? The passion for doing something is the most important driver, and then being able to commercially think through, oh, maybe there is an opportunity to make some money out of this first. I don't think it works the other way around. It's like, I need to make money. I'll just try and design a pedal or something. I think that's the wrong.
Probably not the best decision, is it? Yeah. I mean, I think in a way there's a parallel to different kinds of like record producers, for example. Like, as a producer, I'd much rather just work with bands that I really love the music of. Like, it's such a great thing to be a fan of the band that you're working with, and to be really passionate about the process and enjoying creating this thing that's going to go out into the world with the knowledge that, like, well, if I like this, then some other people are going to like it. Maybe it's never going to be the biggest thing in the world. Than to do it the other way around, of like just to try and work with acts that you think are going to get the next number one.
Yeah, I think if I remember rightly, actually, in fairness, the sort of the Periphery and the immediately after Periphery, it was production was the thing, wasn't it, before anything else? So take us through that. Again, is this just you've sort of fallen into it, loved it, were good at it, people asked you to do it? Is that simple as that sort of thing? Except
I'd replace like good at it with struggled and found it frustrating.
Right.
But I don't know, there's some kind of character in me where, like, when I know that the tools I have are capable of generating an outcome that I want, and I'm not getting it, I really can't let it go. It becomes all consuming. And it's been all sorts of things. There was a time when I was in Periphery, it was photography, where I'd have a camera on the road and, like, I really wanted my photos to look a specific way. And so just all day, every day, I'd be out taking pictures and then editing them in Lightroom and like being like, oh, the blacks aren't quite inky enough, and like it's like I know I have the things I need and I just haven't figured out this puzzle. It's kind of like a problem solving.
Do you do a lot of DIY at home? Are you the
I'm either that way or I'm like the opposite.
That would be me. I'll go and buy all the stuff I need. I'll buy all the right tools, and I'm still useless at it like that. But that makes me so angry. And then my wife's like, why don't you want to do any DIY? It's just because I hate the outcome. I know that, it's like, I just want to employ someone that will do it well, as opposed to me try my best to do it and still not be happy with the result.
There's only so many hours in the day, right? Like, you probably know that if you dedicated the time and energy, you could do things really well. But yeah. So I guess, I was doing demos for the band, and it was that situation of like, my demos sound bad. I'm using the tools that I know, they were at the time a lot more basic than they are now, but people were getting really good results. Even, people like Misha and some other guys in that scene that were posting their demos on forums and stuff, like, this sounds really good. Why doesn't my stuff sound like that? So yeah, just lots of frustration leading to huge amounts of experimentation, lots of reading up. And then when it came round to Periphery recording their second record, I think Misha recognised that I'd learned quite a bit, even if a lot of it was in theory, and he wanted somebody in the room that understood how the genre should sound, because we were working with a producer who was really talented, really great, is really talented and great, but we weren't sure if he was going to totally get the Periphery sound. So I got brought in as like a co-producer, which really was my foot in the door. And then I worked on all the subsequent Periphery records, and through having the visibility of being in Periphery and doing those records, I started to get other bands interested in, you know, so I worked with Animals as Leaders, I worked with, I'm trying to think now, some of the bands which I was doing. It was tough because I was on the road, so I'd be mixing on headphones we weren't in a bus necessarily, we'd be in this thing called a bandwagon, which is a converted truck with a really loud generator that just vibrates and hums the thing all day when the engine's off. So trying to listen, but your whole body's vibrating and you can kind of hear it. Yeah. Anyway, so I was trying to do professional work, and then, you know, with venue Wi-Fi not allowing me to download files or sending things, I was just like, I wish I could dedicate myself to this more. It wasn't necessarily I don't ever want to play live again, but it was like I just really am passionate about this. There's so many problems to solve, you know. I was still in that really frustrated kind of phase. And so eventually, after a few years of touring and wanting to do more and more stuff with production and getting more and more opportunities, I was like, you know, I want to also have a fixed abode, because with them being American, I'd be over there all the time and not here. And I'd met my future wife, and I was like, I just want to try doing the production thing. And that's kind of...
Where's the guitar playing at this point? Has it completely taken a back seat, or are you still...
I guess so. I actually played some guitar on the Periphery records. That I guess I have certain skills which... I don't know if it's what meant that I was quite naturally good on bass with a pick. It's a certain consistency. I don't know if I created it on bass and then transferred it to guitar, or if I kind of already had it, but there were certain things which I could play on guitar that sounded pretty good for the recording, so I'd play on those. But for the most part, I wouldn't play that much guitar. Certainly not when we were out on the road. And I'd also hit some frustrations with my playing. There were certain things about my technique I realise now were preventing me from reaching quite what I was able to do, and I kind of felt like I'd hit a ceiling and wasn't able to do what I wanted, and I was kind of rage quitting a little bit at that point.
Are you your own worst critic?
Yeah.
You sound like everything you've said so far is there's an underlying I'm not good enough driver.
Yeah, that's deep, but you're right about that. Yeah. I mean, going to public private school in the UK, all boys, only child. There's very much a sense of like, don't want to stick your neck out unless you feel really confident in what you're doing. And like, I would definitely always want to practice and get better on my own in my room before ever showing anything to the outside world. Something I've had to get a lot better at. You know, really, even in my 30s, I was still struggling, like just starting to get better at failing publicly and like being okay with not being an absolute pro at whatever it is I'm trying to do. So, and it's genuinely a double-edged sword, you know. You can spend a lot of time really down that way.
I don't think that's that uncommon.
No, it's not at all.
In professional music.
It's very common, yeah.
And it's funny, isn't it, that I think the double-edged sword thing is that's how you get that good, but it's crippling insecurity all the time.
I think there's a certain point in your life where you either have to find a way out of that, or you're kind of locked into a pretty depressed existence, to be honest. Because
did it help removing yourself from the touring, or was that not really I just mean as in, because you can, perhaps you've got a little bit more space to, I was going to say to fail, but to perceive, you've got a little bit more time and space to perceive that what you did wasn't good enough and redo it again. Whereas of course live, you've got it's one shot. Yeah,
but you're playing bass, no one can hear you anyway. So bass is the least. I don't think I ever felt stressed about playing bass live.
That's really interesting.
I mean, especially coming from guitar, within the context of Periphery, I think the guitar playing is trickier to do live. You know, I'm not saying bass is easier, but I'm playing one note at a time for the most part. I'm far less audible, and it's a lot more resilient. You can beat it to hell and it doesn't sound too out of tune. Whereas with guitar, I would always find the tricky thing live is not digging in too hard and sounding really out of tune or too choppy. And when you're playing stuff like Periphery, it should sound fluid, and it can really not. If you're kind of amped up and playing a much smaller instrument with lighter strings on it, you know, you can really mash the strings and I always found that there was a level of restraint needed that didn't feel as good as actually playing bass feels amazing live. Like, you can really feel it resonating, and there is that sense of like, I could be playing a fret off the whole set and probably no one would notice that much. It's just the truth.
I always think, maybe not in a band like Periphery, but I always think that as long as the singer is in tune and remembers the words, the audience, basically, the rest of the band could be as terrible as you like.
I think maybe drums as well, at least within Periphery.
Right.
Like,
I think
if there's a really solid tempo and the singer's good, you probably get a pretty good impression there.
No, you know what? I think you are. My recollection of listening to some Periphery stuff was that every musician in that band was off the charts good, and it does all. There's no room for. I think you've undersold yourself substantially there. I could guarantee you, I'm sure, had you been playing all the bass parts wrong or badly, you would not have been asked to come back.
Perhaps
and do the next
I'm
gig.
sure the guys in the band in their in-ears would be going like, oh, that's horrible, just sucking a lemon the whole set. But yeah.
Okay, so production.
Yeah.
And then I guess, I began to hear of you, and I think we probably first met through Rabir, and by this time you were already starting to dabble in sound design with the drum stuff. And that's right, you were doing lots of IRs and sort of that early kind of like building sounds for that sort of environment.
Yeah.
Obviously there's the Dingwall thing, which has been perhaps slightly more of a constant with your design input into that. Then we've got Darkglass, and now we've got a guitar with Manson, the Oryx. So it's all just
Neural as well, and bare knuckle, and it's.
I mean,
the list does go on.
So all of a sudden, like, there's been this like creative volcano kind of, maybe it's all been going on for years, and then boom, out it comes, and it's just like. And I suppose you've got the profile now in the industry that people will go, oh yeah, you want to talk about, let's talk. So
it's a lot of it's to do with just opportunity, which I'm super grateful for. I mean, the first connection I had really in the industry was bare knuckle.
Right.
Tim from bare knuckle. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I don't know why, but very early on, before I was in Periphery, he saw something. He took a punt on me. He invited me down to record all the sound clips for their website, not the current one, the one before. Mm-hmm. They wanted to have clips of every pickup done back to back so the tones would be constant. And he brought me down to Cornwall, and we spent many days. And it's a fantastic bit of learning, because pickups, they can be really subtle, the differences. And to be exposed to like needing to listen that critically to appraise these differences, and to experience the whole range of bare knuckle, all the Strats, Tellys, P90s, humbuckers, was like an amazing experience. So he really opened doors for me, which is brilliant.
It's a West Country mafia thing. It goes on all the time. It's just like, but no, look, you're right, and I think Tim and bare knuckle probably just. I think predicted just how big that kind of genre of music was going to be, and made sure that he, worked with artists that were good in that, and it's been great for him. He's designed some amazing pickups. But look, I feel like the conversation has sort of naturally got to a good gear point, so that I don't really mind in what order we do this, but I'd kind of like to sort of cover it all. Yeah, I am similarly sort of fascinated with, I've spent my whole life as a retailer selling guitars, and then I've had the opportunity to work with the Chapman and with Victory and more recently Burns, but all of that, and I have countless phone calls with other brands that I've got no stake in, but they're just like, what, we're thinking about this or that there, and I love it. It's just like, I'm fascinated. I mean, I don't know, I couldn't, if you threw me a bag of transistors and resistors, I wouldn't have a clue what would happen if I wired them up. Yeah. But I love talking to designers who, and sort of go, oh, could this happen, or what would happen if you did this? And I just enjoy that conversation. So we might geek out and nerd out here, and I don't know how long this video will end up being. Probably it can't be that long, but let's start with Dingwall and your relationship there, and how you have helped develop the combustion bass.
My input in this has been really minimal, to be honest.
Right.
Because I was just really lucky. I got introduced to Dingwall via Tom, the old bassist in Periphery, as I say. He was playing a Dingwall. And when I joined the band, I needed an instrument. And it always stuck out in my head because his Dingwall had such low action, a pretty narrow nut width, which as a guitarist felt like, I can play this like a guitar, being a guitarist. And there was the opportunity to go to the London Bass Show and try some of the basics, because Dingwall was there. And I sat with Sheldon and tried the Combustion model, which had been launched, I don't know if it was a year or two before. And I think because their status as a company was very much the very high-end Canadian-made instruments were what they were known for. People weren't necessarily going for the Combustion, which were import models, basic colour schemes. But that was exactly what I wanted. I wanted like a very tourable bass. Yeah. I really liked the sound of like Fender J basses. I always thought that's kind of like just a brilliant sound. And in a way, the Combustion's very similar kind of platform. It's a bolt-on, older maple. The Combustion, the original ones have the pickups further apart. It was kind of like a modern version of that. So instantly it was like, okay, this is it. This is the bass for me. And within a couple of years, or maybe even a year of playing that, I think lots of people were like, oh yeah, that sounds really good and is really suitable for this kind of music. And they started to see a bit of a surge in sales. And then going to the next NAMM, I had my idea of like, I was going to pitch, maybe we could do a model that's got... In the meantime, I'd played a Dingwall bass that had the pickups next to each other and you could wire them in series, which just makes it like one gigantic quadbucker, basically. And I thought that sounded so cool. I was like, if we could have an import model, it doesn't need to change really structurally very much at all, but just do that pickup configuration. And then actually, originally I was thinking of getting bare knuckle involved. I was thinking if we can get bare knuckle involved and then Darkglass electronics to do the preamp, I was thinking, I wasn't really thinking in terms of numbers business-wise, but in my head I was like, if we can put together 3 brands which are pretty trending right now in one instrument, then maybe it could get some traction. The bare knuckle thing was just too tricky to make work, especially at the price point, but we had the Darkglass EQ, which I designed, pickups like that, and I asked them to make the neck feel a little bit slimmer, which they accomplished actually not by changing the neck depth, but by making the board more radiused. So actually it's just a bit lower at the edges, and it blew my mind how much that changed the feel. And the NG2 was born, and we went with the kind of carbon fiber guard thing. This bass here was the final signed off prototype. There was one other bass as well. Oh wow! So you've had that that's been there right from the get. I was going to say right from the get-go, which was a terrible choice of words, but I just mean, but right from the start. Sounds like you're reading my driving license. But the carbon guard got a bit darker by the time it came to release, which I think looks better anyway, because I think it's a little bit garish, but I do love this instrument. And yeah, it's remained fairly unchanged. We now have the NG3 model, that one there, which has the 3 pickups. Right. So basically, it just allows so that when you have the series position that I like so much, you've got the 2 pickups next to each other. But when you go to the kind of J bass sound, which is parallel, that bit of extra distance, it kind of becomes the bridge and the neck together, and it sounds a bit more like an actual J bass. Would you mind if, I don't mind whether you want to play the NG2 or the NG3, but could you just maybe, I'm interested in this, we're going to probably come back to this series parallel sort of theme. I'm interested on a bass, how it does give you the sort of tone palette that you're looking for. Yeah, so we're going through quite a lot of distortion here. I'm just trying to think if maybe it might make sense to just go to a clean DI. First of all, in parallel, the 2 pickups feeding together, not one into the other to the output, so it doesn't get much louder than just having one pickup on. And with that, it has that scooped kind of mid-range nice sound. Clarity, nice bass end, as you say, slightly scoopy. And then you put them in series, so one is feeding into the other, it's double the power. It's like all this mid comes forward, and the level is just much, much bigger as well. So on the NG3, when you're switching between that sort of series and parallel mode, you aren't going through all 3 pickups, are you, when you go in series? So it's just literally, it's still the same idea, but with the pickups further apart, so it's just a different tone. Yeah, so there's still only 4 positions on the selector, and you can either have these 2 in sorry, you can either have these two in series, or these two goes to pick up here in parallel. Which I do think is like an even bigger variation. That's quite cool.
And typically, if you're playing, are you using the parallel tone for perhaps the sort of the cleaner, more ambient stuff, and then if you just need some drive, you're just going into the series mode? So to be honest with you, it's not. It's really not dissimilar to how a guitar player would think, with their single coils and humbuckers and series parallel type switching.
Well, to take it a step further, I mean, like throughout my career, I've kind of gravitated towards different settings. And for the last few years, I've been playing bridge pickup only, which is very much influenced by guitar playing, because I do distort my bass tone quite a lot, and the bridge, while it sounds quite thin compared to like when you go to the bridge, it's suddenly light on the bass and quite kind of honky, but you distort that, and I guess it has a harmonic-y thing that's a bit more similar to the bridge pickup drive tones on the guitars. So, and you can fill the low end again afterwards with your amp EQ or whatever. So I've been really enjoying just using bridge pickup for a time now.
I mean, I think it's I would say 75% of new guitar and bass shapes, inevitably you go, I don't think I really like that. And then every so often I'll put the combustion in the sort of 25% of new shapes that come along, and you go, no, that works. And I think all of this is a lovely detail. The scratch plate sets it off nicely, the sort of the multi-scale. It's a cool looking bass.
And zero credit to me. It's all Sheldon, and it's the functionality of it as well, because I've seen other companies' fan fret instruments where they try and do a scale this long, and it ends up being really big, and this is, for how long it is, it's really compact and very playable. So
I'd like to talk that distortion thing. It's a nice segue onto a pedal that's on the floor here, and it also as well, I think, now I'm not a bass player, so when I add distortion to the guitar, I kind of know what I'm doing, and I think you can put a lot of distortion on guitar and still get really cool sounds. I find with bass, I really struggle to get usable distorted bass sounds if I approach it in the same way I do as a guitar player. So what am I doing wrong? What as a bass player that wants to put distortion on the sound, is it it's got to be a very different kind of distortion, a very different mix of how much gain you're using, or what's the secret sauce?
Well, the big problem really is just low frequencies have so much energy. You chuck them through a distortion and they totally dominate the sound, and you just get that really woolly, oversaturated low end with no definition, because those bass frequencies have just got so much more power than the high frequencies. So the solution to that, there's a few different ones. You could simply distort less. You're still going to end up with a kind of slightly fartier tone, which, depending on how you're playing, could just sound quite smooth if you're just playing very smoothly. But if you're picking aggressively, it's a bit kind of saggy and woolly. You could do that and blend in some clean amp or clean DI, so that there's a bit more of a clean low end coming through. Or really the step which most rock and bass players use when they're distorting their bass tone is to kind of have a crossover. So you've got a low cut before the distortion, and here actually things like using the bridge pickup only work in my advantage, because there's less low end coming off through the pickups and out through the chord into the distortion. So you're basically trying to take away low frequencies from the distortion. The more you do of that, the more it becomes this kind of grindy and tight sounding distortion, but it's really thin, so you need to fill the low end out with a parallel signal basically.
And is that where, so I suppose if you plug a bass guitar into a traditional distortion pedal, it's not doing any of that?
No.
So,
well, it might be a little bit.
Right.
Something like a tube screamer has actually got a massive filter on it. It's like everything below about 700 hertz and then everything down to about 700 hertz. That's why it sounds like it's so mid-humpy.
Right.
And that's why metal players love to put it in front of high gain amps, because you still get the same problem there.
Right.
The tube screamer cuts the low end before the distortion, so that you're mostly hearing the distortion in the mid-range frequencies and not in the low.
And the low end is still there, but not distorted.
Yep.
Interesting.
Well, you're putting it through so much distortion on the amp that it all kind of comes back up again, but the amp's not reacting to a very low-endy input signal.
So tell us about this.
Yep.
This is a collaboration with Darkglass, is it?
It is, yeah. It's came out a few years ago.
And you've worked with Darkglass again many times throughout your
from the beginning
career.
As far as bass goes, yeah.
Has lots and lots of knobs and LEDs and split switches on here. So I'm not going to do it a disservice by just saying, is it a distortion pedal? It's obviously a lot more than that. But what have we got going on here?
It is. I mean, it's a computer under there, right? It's
Right.
a full signal chain. So it's doing exactly what I just described, where it's separating the tone that's coming from the instrument into various channels and then recombining them at the output. You've actually got multiple distortion types, which are mostly affecting how much low end goes into the distortion, so that if you want, you can make it sound a lot more fuzzy or a lot more kind of tight and grindy. You've got various impulses loaded in as well, and you can load your own ones on there, but I made some specifically for the pedal. You've got the graphic EQ, you've got compression as well, multiple types of compressor, and you can have 3 saved presets on the unit and kind of load more. So
this is so you could use this either as a DI straight into a DAW and then just record your bass like that, or live straight to front of house.
Exactly, as I'll do later. Yeah. So it's based on the signal chain that at the time I was using like exclusively for recording. So it's basically my recording bass sound in a box.
Can we have and the 3 switches, are they just the 3 presets, or I noticed you've got something to do with there's a couple of sine waves on there and a circle, whatever that's
they've got detents on them. They're actually spinnable.
Oh wow.
So they change the modes, and then you can dial in various parameters based on what they're switching, what they're on.
And is that the black slots, is that some sort of graphic EQ?
That's a graphic EQ,
right.
yeah. And it's all kind of touch. So it's all recalled by the preset.
Look at that!
Yeah, it's very, very cool.
Why have I not seen this before? That's so cool.
Well, mine's not the only one that has that tech. So the Darkglass pedals that kind of have this form factor will have a similar thing. So, and then you've got like 3 savable presets, so you can have 3 different sounds with different drives, different compressions, whatever you like.
Well, I mean, and we better hear it. I mean, it's called, we've got some aggressively distorting advanced machine. Yeah. So let's hear some aggressive distortion.
I mean, it's pretty aggressive. So there, it's not super distorted. Yeah, drastically different sound if you want it. That's very fuzzy.
Yeah, the 2 blue, or the first 2 settings, you can massively hear how clean the very bass end is, though. So that's where, so you can still, it's literally, that is such a great explanation as to how to get a good distorted bass tone, because you just need the distortion on the top bit, don't you?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can kind of choose, right? Like, I guess what you really want to distort are the mid-range harmonics, which need to be coming off the string in the first place, which is quite important, because you have a bass with particularly dead strings, or certain types of bass just sound very kind of more like an upright bass kind of sound, and they don't have those harmonics, and you distort it. Even if you take out the low end, there's just kind of not much there to distort. So, the thing which I've always loved about the Dingwalls and other, jazz basses and stuff, is they have that piano-like kind of harmonic set. Yeah. That piano-like quality, when you distort it, works really well, but it needs to be there in the signal in the first place.
And are you typically, would you use all 3 of those sounds during a set, or is it you typically just put it on one sound and that's your...
I'd probably just, to be honest, I could do a whole set just on the first preset, which is kind of a lower gain level, and I can roll back the volume a little bit, and then that's still a pretty distorted sound, but I can still.
I think it's an interesting... I normally went by the premise that bass players make better guitar players than guitarists make bass players. So you might be the exception to that sort of rule. But I've always enjoyed watching someone who grew up playing the alternative one, because I think that particularly their right hand approaches the instrument differently, and they get different tones and different stuff. And it's interesting watching you play, because I think your right hand is... I think you can tell you started as a guitar player, and it suits a certain style and sound.
The right hand, the interplay between the technique, the kind of pick you use, the string tension is kind of where my sound comes from, really, and the instrument itself. Because what I learned was, if you're not distorting the notes as much, especially in the low end, you need to play more evenly. You just need to. And I wanted every note to be aggressive, so I kind of really worked until it just sounds like, you know, like every note is just like 127 MIDI kind of thing, you know? and very, very even, so that... So it's just like every single note is the same. And I mean, if I put it on the DI, I know the level's really low, but like, I want that DI, I'm looking at it on the screen, to just look like every pick is exactly the same volume, and it kind of looks like it, you know, so I'm doing my job pretty well.
Why wouldn't you just use a compressor to do that then, or something, rather than trying to get it with the
timbre?
Right.
The timbre, like the compressor can even out the volume, but with the bass, you learn quite quickly that if you don't fret properly and you don't pick properly, the low end content is all over the place. And I want, again, talking about pianos, I want this to sound like someone hammering a grand piano an octave below the distorted guitars, because that's how I get my audibility. But, you know, really key was the discovery of using soft picks on bass.
Oh, man.
So that's a 0.6, so it's like the orange Dunlops.
Wow.
That's what I've always used on bass. And the problem is, if you use something thicker, you just get caught up in the strings, and it just canes your wrist as well. So here, the issue is sometimes you need to remember not to choke on the pick, because sometimes it can feel like it's flexing a lot. But I wanted to be able to move my hand without too much resistance from the pick. And because the strings are so thick, if you're using a bigger pick, I mean, I used to break bass strings a lot on my first tour, because I thought bass, you have to play a big pick. I was using a stubby, I think, you know, those really big ones, and I would just break them all the time because I was trying to dig in, hurting my wrist and breaking strings, which seemed like a pretty rare thing at the time, you know.
So that's interesting. So it's like it's a soft hand, a soft pick, but a sort of quite an aggressive picking technique. Interesting.
Yeah. But I mean, it's also, I think you could relate it maybe a bit to strumming an acoustic. If you strum with a thin pick, you can lay into it and it doesn't sound out of tune. You just get that really nice, almost like someone's got a shaker going underneath your strumming pattern, right? But if you were to strum an acoustic guitar with a heavy pick, it just sounds like you're murdering it. It's just mashing it to pieces, right? So the other thing is like, tuning stability, as it would be on an acoustic. Like, I want my bass notes to have that piano-like, just immediate tone without too much kind of wow, which also is where the extended scale comes in.
I tell you, for the importance of the right plectrum is just, it's another one of those, you know, I think guitar players and bass players, you know, we're probably spending hundreds, if not thousands of pounds on, you know, pedals and amps and guitars and like that. And, you know, it'd be well worth everybody just taking a month out and just going and buying 20 different types of plectrum and just seeing what suits. It's fascinating how that all makes a change.
I mean, the thing which I love to talk about at the moment is to do with picks. Is I think many guitarists have in mind, especially ones that are kind of picking harder, that playing, you know, picking hard is about like kind of punching, like you're punching a boxing bag, but it's not. You're drawing a bowstring, right? Like the pick's hitting the string and then traveling with the string for a while until the pick releases it.
Yeah.
So the pick is kind of responsible for how far you can drag the pick, drag the string, like the angle and the density and flexibility of the material is going to drag it further distance once you make contact, combined with like your pick depth as well. And that is a huge part of your sound. And then like the sound it makes as it releases, you get that little scrape depending on the material and the angle and all those things. And like that, to me, is like one of the most important things about how good someone sounds when they're playing guitar, is like, have they got the interplay between, you know, the resistance on the strings and the pick and how deep they're picking. And if you haven't refined that, then I even find it's difficult to play super in time as well, you know, to get that mechanically tight in terms of like, you know, on the grid. You kind of need the string to be releasing the same way every time. Otherwise you're getting like this random variation in the string release every time. So I think it's absolutely crucial.
That's I sensed a bit of the sort of the producer just sort of, you know, and again the sort of hyper perfectionist.
Yeah, or just the frustrated person with a slightly engineering mind. Like, why doesn't this work, and why is nobody talking about it once you figure it out?
I love the fact that the solution, or whatever, a huge part of the solution is the little 50p thing that we've all forgotten about and that we lose, thousands a year of, It's just... Anyway, look, let's move on to guitars.
Sure.
Got two guitars here today.
Yep.
What we haven't got is your Quad Cortex, right? So
yeah,
just very, very briefly before we get out, would that be your go-to tool for, is it your neural plugin rather, isn't it?
Yeah,
that would be your sort of go-to tool. But can you use your plugin in the Quad Cortex yet, or is that one of the ones?
Not quite yet.
No. Okay,
yet, but it will be very. I mean, I don't know. It might be any day now.
Well, they're gradually working through them all, aren't they, to try and release them on Quad Cortex. So if you're in the studio, you're using your neural plugin.
Usually, yeah.
What's that one called again? The
Archetype.
That's
Nolly
right.
X now. Yeah.
That's one of the original ones, isn't it? I think.
It was the second. No, it was the third one. The first one was a Forte, and then Pliny, and then that one. Yeah.
So that would be in the studio, and you're using that pretty much for anything you do in the studio.
Yeah.
So if you're performing, I don't know, do you even do much performing live?
Well, I had to for the first time in ages at the Guitar Summit last year, and I used the Nano Cortex.
Okay.
Which was perfect for my needs because I don't need too many sounds.
And you just found a couple of amp models that you liked and a couple of IRs you liked?
I actually made profiles of my plugin. And just like used the built-in delay for the lead sound, but otherwise, it was like a profile of my plugin.
That has blown my mind going through, Kemper patches and the number of profiles of other profiles that there are. You just sit up going like,
shouldn't really do that. not make them public anyway, but yeah.
Okay, fair enough. So obviously big neural fan, and as many guitar players are nowadays.
Yeah.
But
quite a personal connection too, because Doug from Darkglass is, one of the founders of Neural.
Yes, the serial successful inventor, that man.
Yeah.
So did your relationship start when it was still owned by the Manson brothers, or was your relationship since Matt Bellamy has bought it?
Yeah, so it was right around the time that Matt was kind of taking ownership. But it was unrelated to that. It was really the mutual link was through Pete Miles, who owns a studio literally the village over, that I use a lot, that I have used a lot, have been going there for like 10 years. He's a good friend, and he was very good friends with the Manson guys, and they were looking to design a guitar that might be a little bit outside the kind of realm of what they'd done before, and Pete suggested they talk to me, and I jumped at the chance. As we've spoken about, I really enjoy doing the product design things and going down the rabbit holes of figuring out why things sound good. So it was a really great project, and we came up with this. What you're holding is the most recent one. This is the original Oryx model,
right?
Which was just a complete ground-up design focused on making the best sounding guitar, which is really nice because we didn't go at it with this is how much it has to sell for, or with any preconception really about what it was going to come out with spec-wise. We ended up with some choices like the Tune-o-matic bridge, purely for sonic reasons, because we found them to make a really big difference. And I know there's so much debate about what affects the sound of an electric guitar, but I defy anyone to do some tests and not find that the bridge makes a really drastic difference, because even with the Tune-o-matic, if you just switch out different materials, it's a really drastic difference. As well as things like I mentioned earlier about like positioning of pickups, and then it's got a custom shape. We're using like a sustainable material, rich light for the fretboard, which also functions almost a bit like a carbon fiber rod because of how stiff it is. And it was just like a really great project because they were so open to trying whatever, and really tickled my fancy from a design perspective. I wanted to have special pickups in it, and I spoke to Tim. I thought we were just going to do some OEM pickups for it. Tim, at Bare Knuckle is his, said straight away that it should be released as its own model, which I definitely felt like I'm not a guitarist. Why would I have my own signature model? But we ended up doing it, and it's gone on to be really successful. They're called the Polymath set, and perhaps because I'm not approaching it in the same way that an artist might, I think it is something which seems to have really resonated with a lot of people. I'm kind of bringing more of my producer mindset about shaping the low end and how the mid-range should sound to work well through distortion, rather than kind of just reacting purely on like, oh, I like this.
So I'd like to talk about some of the features. First and foremost, I think this is probably a personal choice, I think, through guitar players. But I challenge any guitar player that genuinely says they just don't really care about the aesthetic. I'm like, I don't believe you. It's almost like, we are all ultimately slight posers when it comes to playing the guitar, and everybody wants to look cool playing the guitar.
So there's certainly be guitars that you wouldn't play. Yeah.
So how much of, I'm thinking of things like the reverse headstock.
Yep.
So I think reverse headstocks are super, super cool, but I probably end up going, I think the aesthetic is the stronger argument for a reverse headstock rather than some sort of, what's the right word? I don't necessarily think that, I've not heard an argument that suggests that a reverse headstock is better than a regular orientation headstock. I just think it looks cooler.
Yep.
But knowing, from the conversation that we've had over the last hour or so, I'm fully expecting you to tell me that no, a reverse headstock is better for X. So why the reverse headstock?
I mean, it's part of a system, right? But ultimately, if you can make the string flow through the nut back and forth and return to its position more easily, you should have better tuning stability.
Yeah.
And often the problem when you have a really short bit on the other side is it's restricting the movement of the string, and you tend to get more tuning issues. It creates a problem too, which is that has a way louder kind of ring to it than the equivalent if it was the other way around and that was the treble string, which from a metal perspective isn't always wanted. Also the Tunematic has those resonances as well, which you can hear through a distorted amp. But I do love the aesthetic of it, and I do find that tuning stability, not just as a whole in terms of it going out of tune over time, but how it sounds just when you strike a chord and the notes not having too much of a settling in time into the pitch. I do notice a difference with the reverse headstock.
That's so cool. Yeah. I knew that was coming, and I'd heard, I'm trying to think who else... Is Nuno Betancourt's guitar reverse headstock?
Yep.
I think I've heard him talk about it. I mean, of course,
but he has a Floyd. Well, no, I think he has a Floyd and no locking nut. Obviously, once you throw a locking nut on,
I suppose it makes no. But but of course, the original, the original goat of the reverse headstock is Jimi Hendrix, who obviously had, who entirely would not have been going. Yes, I need this longer bit of string here, but that. There will absolutely be some physics that says if the thicker string is the long string as opposed to the thinner string being the long string, it's got to have some impact on, whether it's tuning stability or something.
But it is part of a system, and the break angle isn't just backwards, it's also side to side if you don't have a direct string through the angle of the headstock. So as with many complex systems, you can't really look at one thing in isolation.
100%. I mean, that's one of the things I think. You take the original Leo Fender design headstock, and it's a beautiful headstock, but what you mustn't miss is he's done that to get that perfectly straight string angle through. As soon as you look at a Gibson, and everybody goes, "Oh, why is my G string always seem to be so?" It's like, well, but look at what the string does when it hits the nut on that. But hey, I don't know why more people don't use these Steinberger style tuners.
They're very cool, aren't they? So Manson have those machined, and I mean there's just so many benefits, because when you're tuning with the regular pegs, now I find I'm like getting my fingers stuck between them all the time. Probably always happened, I just never really noticed.
It feels like the ratio is higher on this, as in you're just sort of
so I mean the ratio hasn't changed. These are go-to 510 tuners, so they're standard. Actually, I don't think those are 510s. I think those are a different one. But...
So this is a conventional tuner that all they've done is remove the button and interesting.
That's
so it's
right.
it is just that sense of rotary as opposed to twisting the peg that just makes it feel a little bit it feels like it just is slightly more accurate is maybe the wrong, but like there's a more fluid motion.
And you don't have to rotate your whole hand. You can just do it between your fingers, right? Which is quite nice. And then you put it in a case or a gig bag, and it doesn't get.
I hadn't even thought about that. Yeah, that's true.
That's quite a lot of good reasons. Yeah.
So the Rich Light fretboard.
Yep.
I must admit, I loved the. I remember Gibson used Rich Light on fretboards.
Yep.
And they got absolutely hammered with this, just like, you're just trying cheapskate, because you don't want to use ebony. And the response from Gibson was a bit like, I wish people would just take the time to just, you know, Rich Light's actually more expensive than ebony. You know, it was a conscious decision. It wasn't just what's the cheaper, you know. It is man-made, you're right, but it's super smooth and incredibly long-lasting.
And all you need to do is look at how unsustainable the ebony harvesting practices are, you know, where huge ebony trees are just getting left because it's not quite black enough to get a good price, so that it's not worth kind of hauling back to break up, things like that. And I didn't feel good about that, and I definitely wanted a black fingerboard, so Rich Light was just really good.
Yeah, the other substance was, I think it's called phenolic.
Oh, right, yeah.
And that is, I've seen that used on a few guitars, and that's a similar idea, just this very high gloss. But I think
Parker Flies used those.
Was it?
I think so, yeah.
It was, but that is a completely man-made substance, I think. Whereas I think Rich Light is still like paper-based, isn't it, or something?
I think it's recycled carbon and stuff.
Yeah, but I mean, and who would know if we hadn't just spent 10 minutes talking about it? It would just be ebony fretboard. Yep. What have you got? Stainless steel frets on here?
Stainless frets. Yep.
And they're just they look like sort of regular medium jumbo.
Yeah, they're nothing crazy. They're not the hugest. They're not the smallest. Just enough.
So down to the body, it's very lightweight, quite compact. I said it sort of had a bit of a Parker Fly kind of vibe to here, but what is this made of?
Alder.
Okay, so it's just a conventional Alder body. This has got some sort of cool hammerite sort of finish on it, hasn't it?
Yeah, so they've done those for ages on the Matt Bellamy guitars.
So you've gone one of the chunkier Tunamatics on there, and then strung through the body.
Yep.
So that's a pretty tried and tested kind of design, isn't it?
It's amazing how much just having that makes this sound like what you think of as like a single cut.
Really?
Kind of really chunky sound. This guitar doesn't sound like what you think of when you think of a Super Strat. It sounds way kind of bigger than that. And a lot of that's the bridge. Yeah,
this again, I don't think I've ever seen this before, but you said this has been out for a few years now. So this is a Schaller.
Hannes bridge, yeah.
Well, how did you call this?
It's Hannes.
Okay.
German name. I think it's Hannes.
I mean, I think it looks brilliant. Just I don't know. It looks like something out of a Transformers movie or something. I'm half expecting this guitar to sort of convert itself into a robot at some point. But it looks very cool.
It's got all these kind of graphite parts on it, and that gives it a really specific sound. So I wanted a guitar that just sounded really aggressive in that stringy kind of way, and that I could tune lower and would have lots of clarity. And I've had guitars with that bridge in the past, and always found them, because I was tuning them a bit higher, you know, kind of closer to standard tuning, I didn't love the sound. It felt it was a bit kind of plinky and kind of hollow, especially unplugged, but you'd hear that plugged in as well. And then I tried a friend's guitar. It was a slightly longer scale, tuned really low with one, and suddenly it made a lot of sense because it was so kind of vibrant sounding even in the low tuning. So we designed that guitar, single pickup, the Hannes bridge, and that's just like the chuggiest, most aggressive sounding guitar ever. I
mean, it's an interesting, you know, it's obviously the stop bar at the back, or whatever they call this piece here, is bolted through the guitar, which you would go, that makes sense. But then you've also got, you know, where the strings are going through, I suppose, what would traditionally be like a trem block style thing embedded into the guitar as well.
I think it was a real nightmare, especially in the beginning. I think lots of luthiers tried to fit them and ended up in a mess. I think that's one of the reasons it didn't get adopted as much. I believe it's a lot easier now, the installation process. But
I mean, you'd need a very accurate CNC, wouldn't you, to be able to cut these out and then just be able to drop the bridge in like that. But I think it looks super cool. And so same pickups in both, is it?
Same
Your
pickup.
Polymath, just no cover on this one.
No cover, and that's the whole guitar is 1/2 an inch longer, which is the configuration we use for the 7-string version. So that's basically the 6-string, 7-string. And we had to find a new spot for the pickup on the 7-string because you've changed everything. The harmonics are now more spread out along the string, and you want, you know, if you get closer to the bridge, you lose low end and you get kind of more honky harmonics and brighter sound. If you go the other way, it starts to get a bit kind of middle pickup soundy. But on a 7-string, you're trying to span from a thin string all the way through to a much thicker lower note. So there was kind of a new sweet spot needed to be found that sounded good across all the strings, and that's the position that's in, which visually with that bridge looks quite far away. But it's actually not as crazy as it looks. Like looking at that looks wrong to me, but it's not. It's right.
I think it just. I just find all of this interesting. When I see guitars like this, I want to play it so that I can just make my own decision as to whether I like it or not. You know, it's just it's not just another Strat or another, you know. I think it looks very cool.
Thank you.
What more? I mean, it feels to me 2025 feels to me like the year of the single pickup.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah, and sometimes I just think, you know, guitar brands, you know, the guitar brands have a huge problem, don't they? In that it's fundamentally a 70, 80-year-old guitar design that hasn't changed very much. So I think every year it's like, what do we do to just try and be a bit different? I know, let's just make a load of single pickup guitars. Yeah. I've heard some guitar players talk about, you know, perhaps there is a little bit of science around, you know, why a single pickup guitar might perform differently to a two pickup guitar. Half of me feels it's just another aesthetic that somebody would lean to. But what you know, come on, you I don't believe anything about this was done purely for aesthetics. So what was the single pickup thinking?
Well, okay, so the single pickup thinking was more that I didn't feel like this guitar, from a product design perspective, it's a single-minded guitar. It's got a very specific sound, and I wanted it to be just focused on that sound. And you know, it's just about crazy sounding rhythm, basically. Right. For people that, and oftentimes the people that are into that want an unfussy instrument, and you know, simply having one pickup is one way to do that. It also, having no tone pot makes quite a big difference. Just the loading, even when it's on 10, does take away the resonant peak on the pickup. So not having one does make that pickup perform slightly brighter than it would with two pots on it. There's this logic. I mean, some people talk about like LP Juniors and stuff having better sound. The thing is, with the humbucker, the magnet is right at the bottom. Sorry, let me back up. They say it sounds better often because they say there isn't the magnet pull close to the neck, where, to be fair, in the neck position, the magnet pull does have a much greater influence over the string movement. I'm not saying there's nothing to it, but I'd certainly say with a Strat or Tele style pickup, where the magnets are the pole pieces, so they're sitting that close to the string, you do notice that. I mean, you'll notice if you just raise the pickup or lower it on a Strat, you do perceive the sound changing, even acoustically, in terms of like the sustain, because that is going to disrupt quite a lot, especially if it's Alnico 5. With a humbucker, especially if it's not like a ceramic magnet or something, like these are Alnico 5, and they're actually a variant that's slightly weaker in general. And it's all the way down there, far from the strings. I think the difference is going to be pretty subtle. I mean, one other thing is the guitar's a lot lighter. Yeah. Just by virtue of not having these chunks of metal and pots and electronics and switches. And I do think that's going to have an impact on how it resonates. I don't necessarily think, you know, people talk about like losing wood mass. I don't think it's as much to do with that as much as what you're putting in or not. And I think, you know, just you pick that up and it's a way lighter guitar. And you know, if you pick up a few different Strats and one's way lighter, it tends to sound a bit different. So I do think there's something to that.
I've done that neck pickup Strat thing. Okay. I've visually done that. I've gone, I just want my neck pickup to be a bit fatter. Yeah. So I've raised it so it's nearer the string, and then you can visibly see the string doesn't oscillate for as long. Wow. Like, you know, if you get it, I mean, obviously I'm not talking about making like a millionth of a millimeter difference, but you know, if you wind it up so that it's 2 or 3 millimeters closer to the strings, you can just watch the string return to its static position faster than if you know, so it is. So again, how much, you know, when you're playing and, you know, maybe you're only letting a string ring for a fraction of a second between each pick stroke anyway, how much of a difference that makes, I don't know. But
scientifically, it's making a difference, right? Like the pickup is magnetizing the strings. That's how it works. So if it's doing that, then it's pulling on the strings slightly. But how much are you perceiving that? That's a question.
And then we go and put 3 distortion pedals on it and play.
Exactly.
It's like, look. Obviously, I want to hear this. I want to hear you play it. Okay. I mean, we didn't even talk about the freeway switch or anything like that. So you've got some, and perhaps you can do that in the demo. But I think it'd be nice just to hear you sort of play out on this. And I have to say, I could geek out like this all day. How appropriate this is for YouTube, I don't know. I suspect the people who are left watching are our fellow geeks, which is great. So thanks for staying with us. I just, you know, congratulations, man, on all this. I do think, like I say, it's an inspiring kind of journey, and also one that I think people watching this now who are perhaps there are people watching this who are in the final year of their guitar degree or whatever, or they're, and they're thinking, okay, all right, here I go. I'm going to try and make a living out of this.
Yeah. And
I think it's really, really important now that musicians in the next generation of musicians just accept that pyramid of musicians, whereas maybe 30 years ago, these guys here were uber rich, but these guys here were still making a living. It's like nowadays, these guys here are still uber rich, but these guys aren't making a living anymore. No. So, it is really important that everybody goes, okay, I can still do this if I'm just a little bit more open-minded and clever about how I choose to spend my time and, where I put my efforts.
Yeah, I mean, I also really don't want to underplay how much luck I've had, like those moments we spoke about, meeting Misha, meeting Dingwall, those things happening at the time they did, how Tim took me under his wing. Yeah. Those are really the things that suddenly thrust me into positions where I was able to have, some kind of public presentation of these ideas that otherwise would never have seen the light of day. So, there's so much luck, but it can still happen.
Yeah. I don't know. You say luck. Pete Honore will have said this a lot as well. You can choose to put yourself out there, or you can choose to stay at home.
Yeah.
And if you just get out, do the open mic nights, do the gigs, engage. Go to the guitar shows.
Yeah.
And then you call it luck. Maybe it's self-made fate, whatever, but you make all the decisions that you make add up to ultimately what happens.
Yeah.
So, well, as I said, it's been a pleasure having you down here.
It's been great.
I hope everyone who's watched has found this interesting and informative. I know that Andertons sells the Darkglass stuff and the Dingwall stuff. We'll have to see, and bare knuckle, yes, we shall have to see where the Manson thing goes. I think they look super, super cool, so I will certainly follow that up. But I'm sure you can go to either Adam's website or the Manson website to find out more about those if you want to.
Sure.
Yes, but thank you, sir, for coming down, and good luck tonight. I gather you're doing a little soiree for a few customers and the Dingwall chaps locally tonight as well, so I'm sure that'll be fun. But let's just hear this through the we've gone sort of super analog conventional here, old school.
Yeah,
for the win.
I'm not going to try and play anything too complicated. That's that chunkiness and the chugs. It doesn't sound super thin. If you know what I mean.
I think again, we're not that loud in the room. Everybody talks about, I can't have a valve amplifier because it's too loud. Blah 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 blah. We're not that loud. We're just mic'd up. The angle head with a tube screamer in front of it.
Yeah.
It sounds flipping superb.
Oh, great.
It's like, I just think it's like really everyone, it's like if you play the right stuff, you don't have to have crazy gear to get a good sound.
No, that's true actually, yeah.
Sounds great. And honestly, we're like 15 dB quieter than most of the dad blues jams that Pete and I do. And it sounds superb, man. Oh,
check this out. I'll just plug in the other guitar.
Yeah, do it.
And hear how different it sounds, because it's not subtle. It's also far. It's got that really aggressive
much
front.
Much more aggressive, yeah.
That like very quacky sound.
What are you tuned to on that
I don't even know. I mean, it should be somewhere around drop A.
Sounds great. When I first started doing stuff with Rabir, I was so he would have very low tuning and very little gain, and the percussiveness of the low tuning gave the aggression. It just really opened my eyes to just it's very gainy sounds on a recording are never that gainy.
I'd say, I mean, Rabia plays with less gain than I do. So much of it is that same thing with the bass. Like, if you can filter out lows,
right,
you can gain up more because you're not distorting the low stuff, if you see what I mean. And again, you know, you're doing that acoustically with a different bridge on here as well. Not using super thick strings, putting the right pickup in the right position on the string, you know. Well, and then, so parallel, by the way.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like having a P90 guitar and a regular.
That's super cool. That's super cool. I'm assuming we kept that last bit in, so goodbye again, and see you next time.
Yeah, cool.
Cheers, man. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Cool.